Deep in the Bay of Bengal lives a tribe that refuses all contact with the outside world. But what scientists discovered in their DNA shouldn't exist. They carry genetic markers from a human species that went extinct over 300,000 years ago, a species we didn't even know existed. And this discovery is rewriting everything we thought we knew about human evolution. Their name is the Sentinelese. They live on North Sentinel Island, a small forested island roughly 5 miles long and 3 miles wide, surrounded by coral reefs and tropical evergreen forests. To the outside world, they're one of Earth's greatest mysteries. Estimates suggest between 50 and 200 people live there, though the actual number remains unknown because no census has ever been conducted. The Indian government maintains armed patrols in the surrounding waters to keep outsiders away. Photography is prohibited. Landing on the island can result in death. The Sentinelese have made their position crystal clear for centuries. Leave us alone. But their isolation is not a modern choice. It stretches back tens of thousands of years to a time when the world was unrecognizably different. To understand their story, we have to go back to when the first modern humans left Africa on one of history's greatest journeys. Approximately 60 to 70,000 years ago, a relatively small population of anatomically modern humans departed the African continent. They were equipped with sophisticated tools, complex social structures, and the cognitive ability to navigate unknown environments. They had no maps, no technology beyond what they could carry, and no knowledge of where they were going. Yet they spread across the entire planet in what evolutionary biologists call the Great Migration, or the Out of Africa event. These early humans moved in different directions. Some went north into Europe and the Middle East, others traveled east, following a coastal route through southern Asia. This southern route took them through what is now India, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia. Some of these coastal travelers eventually reached Australia around 48,000 years ago, but not all of them. Some populations became isolated on islands scattered throughout the Indian Ocean. The Andaman Islands, a small archipelago in the Bay of Bengal, became home to several distinct populations. Over time, these populations developed separately from one another and from mainland populations. They created their own languages, their own cultures, and their own unique genetic signatures. The Sentinelese represent the most extreme version of this isolation. While neighboring Andamanese tribes like the Jarawa and the Ongje maintained some limited contact with outsiders over the centuries, the Sentinelese chose a different path. They defended their island ferociously. Historical records show that they killed everyone who attempted to land there. British colonial administrators in the 18th and 19th centuries documented hostile encounters. In the 20th century, after India gained independence and declared North Sentinel Island a tribal reserve in 1956, the Indian government established a policy of non-contact. They recognized that the Sentinelese had the right to their isolation. No attempts at forced contact would be made. No missionary efforts, no development projects. The island became a no-go zone, a place where the Sentinelese could live undisturbed, frozen in time. This extreme isolation makes the Sentinelese biologically extraordinary. For 60,000 years, they have had virtually no genetic exchange with outside populations. No new genes entering from trade or migration, no interbreeding with neighboring groups. Their population remained small and confined to one island, subject to the forces of genetic drift and natural selection in ways that mainland populations never experience. Physically, the Sentinelese are smaller in stature than most modern humans, typically between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches tall. Observers describe them as extremely well built with prominent muscles. They have dark, shining black skin and well-aligned teeth. They show no signs of obesity. Their physical characteristics reveal a population finely tuned to their island environment, shaped by thousands of years of natural selection. But the real story locked in their DNA is far more remarkable than their physical appearance. That story only emerged in recent years, when geneticists began conducting comprehensive genetic studies of isolated populations worldwide. In 2016, an international team of researchers published a groundbreaking study in Nature Genetics, led by scientists, including Jaume Bertrand-Petit from the University of Barcelona and Partha Majumdar from India. The team had sequenced the genomes of Andamanese individuals from the Jarawa and Ongye tribes. They compared these genomes to genetic sequences from mainland Indians, Europeans, East Asians, and Africans. What they found was shocking. All Asian and Pacific populations, the study showed, descended from a single common ancestor population that left Africa during the Great Migration. This contradicted an older theory that suggested at least 2 separate waves of human migration had populated Asia. The research provided strong evidence for one unified origin for all Asian and Pacific peoples. But there was something else in the data, something that initially seemed impossible. The Andamanese populations carried genetic ancestry that simply did not match any known human group. They had genetic material that was neither from modern humans, nor from Neanderthals, nor from Denisovans, the 2 extinct human species known to have interbred with modern humans in Eurasia. This was the discovery of ghost DNA, genetic echoes of an unknown extinct hominin species that had lived and interbred with early modern humans tens of thousands of years ago. The researchers found that South Asian and Southeast Asian populations carried approximately 2 to 3% ancestry from this unknown species. This ghost ancestry was completely absent from Europeans and East Asians, suggesting that the interbreeding occurred after the initial human dispersal from Africa, specifically affecting populations in South Asia and Southeast Asia. The researchers proposed that this unknown hominin species had diverged from modern humans roughly 300,000 years ago. It had survived alongside modern humans in Asia until relatively recently in evolutionary terms, perhaps until the last ice age or beyond. Think about what this means. We are accustomed to understanding human evolution as a story involving modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. We have fossil evidence of these species. We have studied their remains. We have extracted DNA from their bones. But this discovery suggested a fourth major player in human evolutionary history had been almost entirely unknown to science, an entire human species that left no fossil record, or at least none that we had recognized. A species that survived long enough to encounter modern humans in Asia, to mate with them, and to leave genetic footprints in their descendants that would persist for hundreds of thousands of years. The research team attempted to identify the source of this mysterious ancestry. They ruled out scenarios involving low population size or later admixture between distinct populations. They considered whether the pattern could be explained by European or East Asian populations, mixing with Africans at various points in history. None of these explanations worked. The mathematics were clear. Something unknown had interbred with the ancestors of South Asians and Southeast Asians at some point after they separated from other Asian populations. The only logical conclusion was the presence of an unknown archaic human species. Other research has supported and extended these findings. Genetic studies of the Sentinelese have revealed that they carry some of the earliest genetic markers found in Asia. Their mitochondrial DNA, inherited through maternal lineages, shows patterns suggesting early colonization by populations bearing mtDNA lineage M2. This lineage is hypothesized to represent the signal of an early southward movement of humans through Asia, following coastal routes rather than the inland routes that other populations may have taken. The Sentinelese are genetically closest to pre-Neolithic populations in mainland Southeast Asia, such as the Hominians, and show high genetic affinity to ancient individuals like Tian Yuan Man from northern China. These ancient connections place the Sentinelese within a deep Asian ancestral lineage that diverged early from other human populations. When scientists examined the Sentinelese more closely, they found another fascinating pattern. The distinctive physical characteristics of the Sentinelese people, particularly their very short stature, did not originate from ancient African ancestry, as some earlier theories had suggested. Instead, their unique morphology resulted from strong natural selection acting on their genomes over thousands of generations. Using advanced statistical methods, researchers identified approximately 1,000 genomic regions showing signs of adaptive selection in the Sentinelese. These selected regions included genes related to height and body mass, suggesting that island life had placed intense pressure on genes controlling growth and metabolism. Over tens of thousands of years, the Sentinelese became progressively shorter and more compact, an adaptation to living on a resource-limited island environment. The Sentinelese, as part of the broader Sentinelese population, carry this same mysterious ancestral component. They are living descendants of the earliest modern humans to reach Southeast Asia, carrying genetic signatures of migrations that occurred before agriculture, before civilization, before writing. Their DNA is a library of human prehistory. Every cell in their bodies contains information about populations that disappeared millennia ago, about evolutionary encounters between human species, about the global journey of modern humans across continents and oceans. Yet here is the profound irony at the heart of this story. The Sentinelese have no knowledge that scientists have been studying their DNA. They did not consent to genetic research. They did not volunteer DNA samples. They do not know that their island home has become the focus of international scientific attention. The genetic material analyzed came from museum specimens, collected decades ago during rare contacts with outsiders, or from limited samples gathered through research programs that kept the Sentinelese at a distance. Scientists have learned intimate details about their evolutionary history, their migrations, their ancestry, their adaptation without ever asking permission. The specifics of what those genetic studies revealed are even more extraordinary when examined in detail. The research team did not simply identify unusual genetic patterns and move on. They conducted rigorous statistical analysis to determine what could and could not explain those patterns. They examined whether population structure within the Sentinelese could produce the observed genetic signatures. They tested whether admixture between different populations after the initial dispersal from Africa might generate these patterns. They considered every alternative hypothesis that could account for the data. At each step, the evidence pointed in the same direction. An unknown archaic hominin species had interbred with early modern humans in South Asia and Southeast Asia. The timeline of these events matters tremendously for understanding human evolution. The unknown species split from modern humans approximately 300,000 years ago. They evolved separately in Asia for a 250,000 years, adapting to Asian environments and developing their own populations. Then, when modern humans began their expansion out of Africa around 60 to 70,000 years ago and traveled southward through coastal Asia, they encountered these established Asian populations. The two populations overlapped geographically, competed for resources, and mated. Their hybrid descendants survived and thrived, eventually becoming the ancestral populations of modern South and Southeast Asians. Technology makes it possible to extract vast amounts of information from tiny biological samples without an individual's knowledge or consent. A hair follicle, a drop of blood, a piece of bone, all can be analyzed to reveal secrets about ancestry, disease, susceptibility, evolutionary history. The methods used to identify ghost ancestry in the Andamanese genomes represent some of the most sophisticated population genetics techniques available to modern science. The researchers used whole genome sequencing to obtain the complete DNA sequence of their subjects. They then performed comparative analysis with reference populations from around the world. They employed statistical tests designed to detect signatures of admixture, the genetic signals left when two previously isolated populations mate and their descendants inherit DNA from both parental groups. These tests are sensitive enough to detect admixture events that occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago. They can estimate the proportion of ancestry from different sources. They can even suggest approximate dates for when admixture occurred, though such dates carry significant uncertainty. The story of the Sentinelese also highlights a broader reality about isolated populations and genetic research. The Andamanese peoples more generally have experienced catastrophic population decline over the past few centuries. European colonization, disease, violence, and forced cultural change have decimated these populations. The great Andamanese, for example, once numbered in the thousands. Today they number perhaps in the dozens. The Onge population has shrunk dramatically. Only the Sentinelese have managed to maintain a stable, if small, population by maintaining their isolation. Their refusal of contact, their hostile response to outsiders, has paradoxically been the key to their survival. Genetic studies of the Andamanese reveal this tragedy in the data itself. The diversity of their mitochondrial DNA is remarkably low. Their Y chromosome markers show limited variation. Their short tandem repeat patterns indicate a history of small population size and genetic bottlenecks. The Andamanese peoples are genetically uniform compared to most human populations because their numbers have been so severely reduced. In extracting knowledge about human evolutionary history from their genomes, scientists are also documenting the genetic consequences of colonialism and cultural destruction. The question becomes urgent. What happens to this genetic knowledge? How should it be used? The discovery of ghost ancestry in the Andamanese offers fascinating insights into human prehistory, but it exists within a context of exploitation and inequality. For generations, indigenous peoples have been subjects of study by Western scientists. Their bodies have been examined, measured, and analyzed. Their remains have been removed to museums. Their genetic material has been sequenced without consent. The Sentinelese, by refusing contact, have avoided direct participation in this exploitation, but not entirely. Their genetic information has still been studied, still been published, still been used to draw conclusions about human history. Despite these complications, the scientific findings themselves are remarkable. The presence of ghost ancestry in the Andamanese suggests that the picture of human evolution we inherited from previous decades was incomplete. We thought we understood the major players in human evolutionary history. We knew about Neanderthals in Europe, about Denisovans in Asia, about anatomically modern humans spreading from Africa. But the genetic evidence now tells us that there were other significant hominin species in Asia, whose existence we barely suspected. Perhaps there were more. Perhaps in Africa, in the Arctic, in other isolated regions, populations of unknown archaic humans survived longer than we realized. This realization has profound implications for how we understand the last 100,000 years of human history. During this period, modern humans encountered multiple other human species. They interbred with some of them. They may have competed with or displaced others. The genetic evidence suggests these interactions were not rare events, but part of the normal process of human dispersal and adaptation. Modern humans did not spread across the world unopposed. They encountered established populations and adapted to local conditions through both cultural learning and biological admixture. The timeline suggested by the genetic evidence is also significant. The unknown hominin species from which the Andamanese inherit ancestry diverged from modern humans roughly 300,000 years ago. By this point, anatomically modern humans had already evolved in Africa, though behaviorally modern humans may not have fully emerged until later. For the next 200,000 years, modern humans and this unknown species coexisted in Asia. They lived in the same regions. They hunted similar prey. They adapted to the same environments. And at some point, they met and interbred. The resulting hybrid population survived and eventually became the ancestors of modern South and Southeast Asians. This scenario requires us to reconceive of human prehistory as far more complex than a simple linear progression from one species to the next. Human evolution involved networks of related species, some of which coexisted for tens of thousands of years in close proximity. Geographic isolation sometimes led to speciation, creating separate human species adapted to different environments. But contact between these species did occur, and genetic exchange happened. Modern humans, rather than being the inevitable victor in some predetermined evolutionary competition, were one successful form among several. Successful partly because of their ability to adapt culturally, but also partly because of genetic contributions from other species. The Sentinelese, in this context, are remarkable not just because of their isolation, but because of what that isolation preserves. Their DNA carries genetic variants that may represent adaptations to tropical island environments, developed by both modern humans and the unknown archaic species. Their genome is a palimpsest of evolutionary history, layer upon layer of adaptation and selection and genetic exchange. In refusing contact with the outside world, the Sentinelese have protected not just their culture and way of life, but also their genetic heritage as representatives of an ancient lineage connecting modern humans to species that died out thousands of years ago. The research on Andamanese genetics has not been without controversy. Some scientists have questioned the interpretation of the ghost ancestry findings, suggesting that statistical artifacts or methodological issues might account for the patterns, rather than genuine admixture with an unknown species. They have proposed alternative explanations involving population bottlenecks or selection on existing variation within the modern human population. The scientific debate continues, as it should. Science advances through rigorous questioning and replication of results. Different research teams have examined the question using different data sets and approaches. While some studies support the conclusion of unknown archaic admixture, others have suggested more conservative interpretations. This healthy scientific disagreement reflects the genuine complexity of ancient DNA analysis and the challenges of inferring population history from modern genetic sequences. What is certain is that the Andamanese populations possess genetic characteristics that current evolutionary models do not fully explain. Whether those characteristics result from admixture with an unknown species or from other evolutionary processes, they represent important anomalies that deepen our understanding of human prehistory. The very fact that researchers have dedicated significant effort to analyzing these genomes and publishing their findings demonstrates the importance the scientific community places on understanding human migration and evolution. The Andamanese hold keys to unlocking mysteries about our species' past that we are only beginning to understand. What we do know with certainty is that the Andamanese peoples, including the Sentinelese, are living connections to deep human history. Their presence on islands in the Indian Ocean represents a continuous lineage, stretching back to the very first waves of modern human dispersal from Africa. Their languages, though now severely endangered or extinct, represent linguistic diversity that evolved over tens of thousands of years of isolation. Their cultures embody adaptations to tropical island environments that modern humans have inhabited for longer than humans have inhabited most other regions of the world. Their knowledge of their island environment, their hunting and fishing techniques, their ecological understanding, represent sophisticated applications of human cognitive abilities developed over countless generations. Yet all of this is threatened. The Sentinelese population remains small and potentially vulnerable. Contact with outsiders brings disease risks to populations with no immunity to common pathogens. Tourists seeking access to the island, missionaries hoping to convert the population, developers seeking to exploit resources, all pose threats to Sentinelese autonomy and survival. The Indian government's policy of non-contact protects them, but such policies can change with political circumstances. Climate change poses environmental threats to island populations globally. Rising sea levels could inundate their island. Changing ocean currents could affect fish populations they depend upon for food. The scientific study of Andamanese genetics also continues to raise uncomfortable questions about research ethics and indigenous autonomy. International discussions about genetic research involving indigenous peoples have led to increased emphasis on informed consent and benefit sharing. Indigenous communities in various parts of the world have demanded the right to control genetic information about their populations. They have sought to establish policies ensuring that genetic research benefits their communities and respects their cultural values. These conversations are important and necessary, They represent a shift toward more equitable relationships between scientific researchers and the populations they study. For the Sentinelese, such protections are complicated by their refusal of contact. They cannot be asked for consent if outsiders are prohibited from approaching them. Yet one could argue that their refusal of contact itself constitutes a form of refusal of genetic research. If they do not want contact with outsiders, presumably they do not want their genetic material studied by outsiders either. Yet the genetic research has continued based on specimens collected in the past, before modern ethical frameworks emerged. The deeper question this raises concerns the ownership of genetic knowledge. If scientists discover important truths about human evolution by studying the genomes of indigenous populations, who benefits from that knowledge? If breakthroughs in understanding human disease or human health arise from genetic research on isolated populations, should those populations receive compensation or access to resulting medical advances? If knowledge about a population's ancestry is revealed through genetic studies, who has the right to that knowledge? These questions remain contested and unresolved in the broader scientific and ethical communities. Yet from a purely scientific perspective, the genetic discoveries made through the study of Andamanese populations have been extraordinary. They have revealed dimensions of human evolution that were previously completely unknown. They have forced geneticists to reconsider models of human migration and speciation. They have opened new research directions investigating the nature and scope of admixture between archaic and modern human species. They have generated hypotheses about unknown hominins that other researchers are now testing through studies of different populations and different datasets. The Sentinelese themselves continue their lives on North Sentinel Island, largely unchanged by these scientific discoveries. They hunt, they fish, they gather, they maintain their social structures and cultural practices. They defend their territory against outsiders. They know nothing of the genetic research bearing their population's name. They do not know that scientists have identified mysterious ancestry in their DNA. They do not know that their existence has become central to debates about human evolution and migration. They do not know that their island is protected by international attention to their plight and their choices. Perhaps there is something fitting in this asymmetry. The Sentinelese chose isolation. They chose to remain separate from the modern world. Yet the modern world, through the power of genetics and scientific analysis, has reached them anyway. It has accessed their most intimate biological information. It has studied their DNA and drawn conclusions about their ancestry and their evolution. No scientist has set foot on their island. No researcher has spoken with them. Yet the Sentinelese have become central figures in contemporary debates about human origins and evolution. In this sense, the story of the Sentinelese and their DNA is a story about the limits and possibilities of modern science. Science can reveal truths that were previously hidden. It can access information that individuals never intended to share. It can generate knowledge that reshapes our understanding of ourselves and our world, but it operates within social and ethical contexts. It raises questions about power and consent and benefit and fairness. It forces us to consider what we owe to the populations whose biological information we study, whose evolutionary histories we trace, whose genetic secrets we unlock. The discovery of ghost ancestry in the Sentinelese and other Andamanese populations represents genuine scientific progress. It expands our knowledge of human evolution in ways that enrich our understanding of our own species. It reveals the complexity and interconnectedness of human prehistory. It shows that human history is far richer and more intricate than simpler narratives suggest. But it also reminds us that knowledge does not exist in a vacuum. It is always embedded in relationships of power and structures of inequality. The challenge for the scientific community moving forward is to generate that knowledge in ways that respect the autonomy and dignity of the populations being studied, that ensure benefits are shared equitably, and that recognize Indigenous peoples as partners in understanding their own histories rather than merely as subjects of study. For now, the Sentinelese remain on their island, maintaining their isolation, living as their ancestors have lived for tens of thousands of years. Their DNA carries stories we are only beginning to read, messages from the distant past encoded in their genetic material. Those messages tell us about human evolution, about ancient migrations, about unknown species and long-lost encounters. They remind us that we are connected to deep history, that the modern world is the product of countless interactions and adaptations extending back to the earliest days of human civilization. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that isolation and autonomy are choices that some people make, choices that deserve respect even in an era of unprecedented scientific power and global interconnection. The Sentinelese have spoken through their actions. They want to be left alone. Whether the outside world will respect that choice remains to be seen.